Hello YouTube, it's Snowflarky. Here today I'm presenting my Fang of Critias deck. Out of all the legendary dragons, Kritius has always been my favorite, mainly because I'm a big fan of trap cards if you've seen other deck profiles on this channel. So the idea of a fusion with trap cards is very cool. I definitely thought it was very cool. So I figured I had to grab Fang of Critias and play it in my collection. So there's some Fang of Critias decks around. A lot of people play it with Layer of Darkness for natural kind of trap card synergy. But I have opted to play it with a different deck core that I play quite a bit and am a big fan of. Also tends to be a kind of trap heavy deck, and that is Pacifist, the Phantasm City. So when I play regular pacifist decks, they're very stun oriented, trap card oriented. So I said, hey, why don't I just take that kind of core, and instead of doing the hardcore stun lockdown traps, why don't I just play the fun, silly traps that also allow me to play the Fang of Critias, and so it created a fun deck profile for me to play at Duel Night, and that is where we are. All right, so let's get into the deck profile. Starting off with our monsters, we are playing a very low monster count, only 5 monsters, 3 of which are Megalo Smasher X. This is a 2000 attack, 4-star monster. 2000 attack on a 4-star normal monster is the highest you can get off of a free normal summon, so we definitely want to be making use of the largest attack stat. And the notable thing about Megalo Smasher X that makes us play it is that it is a water attribute, which is very important with the synergizing with Sea Stealth Attack, which you play in this deck, so we definitely want to be taking advantage of the water attribute. And then last, our other 2 copies are Giant Red Sea Snake. Yugioh is technically a better card than this with 50 more attack, but it's only 50 more attack, so I figured since this is a fun deck anyway, I would rather show off the beautiful ultra rare artwork of Giant Red Sea Snake from Legendary Collection Kaiba. What's important in this deck for this build specifically is that it's an Aqua type monster, and making it a different type than our Megalo Smasher X, as well as a different type from our Critias fusions we will be summoning, which will all be dragons, which is pretty important for something that we'll see later on in the deck build. And that is it for the monsters. Next up, getting into our spell lineup, we are playing 3 copies of the Fang of Kritius. The namesake of the deck, of course, we're going to be playing the Fang of Kritius. Now, 3 is a bit overkill. 2 would definitely be more optimal as far as success rate, just because it's very unlikely you'll ever be able to resolve all 3 in one game. But given that this is a fun deck and it is built around the Fang of the Kritius, I chose to play 3 just so I could see it. It is the whole reason to play this version of the deck after all. So, if you want a little more win rate, you could always just play 2. But essentially, the Fang of Critias is just a spell card that allows you to summon one of the Critias fusions from the extra deck as long as you have the corresponding trap card that is needed to summon specific fusions. Those are listed on the fusions of Critias, and we will go over those when we get to the trap cards. So 3 Fang of Critias in order to get those Critias fusions out. Next up, we are playing the Heart and Soul of the Phantasm deck, Pacifist the Phantasm City. This card is a doozy and quite a rulings nightmare. So once per turn, if you normal or special summon 1 normal monster, you can add a Phantasm Spiral card from the deck to your hand. So we definitely like taking advantage of that for card advantage. And if you're using any of Pacifist effects, you have to note that you can't summon any effect monsters the turn you do so, which is important because you need to make sure you don't accidentally trigger any pacifist effects the turn you're going to play a Fang of Critias to get a Critias fusion out. Other than that, the biggest thing about Pacifist the Phantasm City is that when your opponent activates a card or effect, while you control no tokens, you will summon a Phantasm Spiral token, which is an 8-star water worm token with 2,000 attack and 2,000 defense onto your field. That gives you extra board presence to do damage with, a token that will always be coming back up. So definitely a powerful card, and of course tokens count as normal monsters, so if that's summoned, say, during your opponent's turn, then you get to search a pacifist card, a Phantasm Spiral card, during that turn. So overall, pretty good card. The reason it becomes quite a bit of a rulings nightmare is that you usually have to explain that, like, if I have my token and you play Dark Hole, and the token is removed, well then Pacifist immediately triggers and summon a new token because a card or effect was activated. So it definitely can get a bit clunky in understanding all the intricacies of how Pacifist the Phantasm City works, but it's a very powerful card that normal monsters love to make use of, and even though it has anti-synergy with Fang of Critias, being that you can't use both Critias effect and Pacifist on the same turn, we still want to play Pacifist because it's an overall good card that'll give you lots of opportunity to play Fang of Critias on a later turn. Next up, I'm playing 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. We have built our extra deck in a way that we want to play Pot of Extravagance to gain extra card advantage, banishing 3 to 6 random cards from the extra deck in order to draw 1 card for each 3 that we banished is pretty good. Turns your extra deck into card advantage. On this kind of deck, especially a deck that is so trap heavy, we want to see every card that we can. And in order to play this card, all the Critias fusions and extra deck cards that we need are being played as 3-ofs, so that it is very unlikely that we will banish all of them. Next up, just more things to move the deck. We are playing a copy of Terraforming. Pacifist is very important to get a Phantasm Spiral deck going. It's pretty much the heart and soul. You can't operate without it. So searching for it is very important. And then next I am playing a 1 copy of Card of Demise. This deck is definitely played in a stun sort of way, being so trap heavy. So there are often many turns that you will only be normal summoning during your turn. You don't need a special summon, so you might as well load up your hand with up to 3 cards. And because you're playing so many spell and trap cards, it is very likely you will be able to set most of those cards instead of discarding them to the graveyard. You can even set a Fang of Critias that you draw off and then play it on your next turn. It does leave it vulnerable, but it's one of the reasons that I'm playing 3 copies. If they pop 1, that's fine. So definitely like seeing Card of Demise to get through the deck. And last for spells, I am playing 3 copies of Pot of Duality. Pot of Duality, in a deck where we need something very crucial, like we either need Phantasm City, or we want to see Sea Stealth attack, or we want to get a particular trap card to answer a situation, and we don't always have to special summon. Well, Pot of Duality is very nice consistency booster to look at the top 3 cards of the deck, add 1, and shuffle the rest back in exchange for not being able to special summon. Even though we can't special summon with Critias, the way this deck is played, we will not necessarily be doing so every turn, so there's plenty of turns for you to use your duality. And that is it for our spell cards. With spells out of the way, that gets us into our beefy trap lineup that we play in this deck. So starting off, we'll talk about the Critius fusion traps. We are playing 3 copies of Mirror Force. Mirror Force is in here because with Fang of Critias, it will summon out Mirror Force Dragon, which is my favorite and one of the most powerful of the Critias fusions. So having 3, some will be fodder, some will be played normally. We want to see Mirror Force. So, and of course Mirror Force, when your opponent declares an attack, you destroy all attack position monsters they control. Definitely also useful outside of fusing with Critias. A big Mirror Force can catch a lot of opponents off guard, especially in a casual deck environment like I am playing in. So Mirror Force, definitely like having at 3 of. Next up, we have 2 copies of Ring of Destruction. This is another card that will fuse into a Critius fusion, the Destruction Dragon. Outside of that, though, Ring of Destruction, you simply target a monster your opponent controls, destroy it, and you both take damage equal to the attack strength of that monster. Very important with the errata to note that you can't do that to lower your opponent's life points to 0 unless their opponent's life points equal exactly the monster you're targeting. So do keep that in mind with the errata, but Ring of Destruction, pretty cool. Pretty cool to play, and of course great to fuse into a Critius fusion. And then lastly, for the Critius trap cards, I am playing 1 copy of Tyrant Wing. This card is in here as a one-of because I like Tyrant Burst Dragon quite a bit. It can be a pretty powerful card, but outside of being a Critius fusion, this doesn't necessarily have too much use in the deck build unless I already have a Critius Dragon out, because Tyrant Wing requires me to use a Dragon type monster for its effect. It'll essentially give it 400 attack and defense, and then it can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. So Tyrant Wing mostly in there for the Tyrant Burst Dragon fodder. You can play it if you have another Critius trap card. That is it for the Critius traps. So now let's look at the rest of the trap lineup. I am playing 3 copies of Phantasm Spiral Battle. This is the main card that you'll be searching off of your pacifist search, and it simply states if all monsters you control are normal monsters, minimum of 1, target 1 card your opponent controls, destroy it. And of course, if Umi is on your side of the field, which Pacifist the Phantasm City always counts as Umi according to its card text, you can play this card from your hand. So you can add this card during your opponent's turn, immediately play it. What's important about this card is that it's only active while you have all normal monsters, so as soon as you commit to a Critius fusion, you're not going to be able to play this card, but that's okay because you can normally just play them all before you summon a Critius fusion, or save them for if your Critius fusion gets removed. But usually, you can just play them all preemptively, eliminate lots of cards. There's usually always a card on the field, so that doesn't tend to be a drawback too often for me. I just play it before I just play them out before I play Critius. Next, I'm playing 1 copy of Phantasm Spiral Power. Usually if you're out of battles, I'll grab this card. But if all monsters you control are normal monsters, minimum of 1, you target an effect monster your opponent controls, it loses 1,000 attack and defense, and its effects are negated. Now, this card also works like Phantasm Spiral Battle, where if Umi's on the field, you can just play it right from your hand. So as soon as you add it, you can play it. It's live. We like that. Next up, probably my favorite card in a Phantasm Spiral deck. The interactions with this are so sick. This is C Stealth Attack. So this is a continuous trap card that when it's activated, you can activate an Umi from your hand or graveyard. So if your Pacifist is popped, you can put it right back on the field. And then it gains the effect while Umi is on the field of once per turn, you can banish a water monster you control until the end phase, and face-up spell and trap cards you control cannot be destroyed. Now that effect is a powerhouse in a Phantasm Spiral deck because it allows you to play floodgates that will become indestructible, essentially, and it also keeps your Phantasm City on the field, not being able to be destroyed, which is important to keep things moving. You can also use that ability to tag out the token if the token's already on the field, and give Pacifist the ability to resummon a token after a card effect is played, giving you a fresh token as well as a search off Pacifist, and that'll get those Phantasm Spiral cards out of your deck. Definitely something I do a lot. It's overall a really good play. And of course, you can use this to protect your normal water monsters from removal if you're getting Dark Hole or Raigeki. So very versatile card. But that is not it, because the card has one additional effect too, where when a monster you control, a water monster you control, whose original level is 5 or higher, battles an opponent's monster, you can destroy that monster. So it makes your Phantasm Spiral token will always be a level 8, so it can destroy things that it can't get over. Pretty good. Overall, lots of good effects. Protect your floodgates, protect your monsters, resummon tokens. There's so many interactions with Sea Stealth Attack that it is such a great card to have in this deck. Next up, a floodgate that we play that will definitely be protecting. I'm playing 2 copies of There Can Be Only One. This is the reason I chose to run a dinosaur and an aqua type monster. The token you summon is a worm, and the fusions, of course, are dragons. So, you know, we can make pretty good use of There Can Only Be One, a card that oftentimes can be very game-winning in certain matchups, because There Can Only Be One says that each player can only control 1 monster of each type. So, you know, I can't have 2 dinosaurs, but I can have 1 dinosaur and an aqua, so that's where the interaction is. And if you wanted to go all in on that, you could theoretically just play one of water monsters of all different types, but I don't find that necessary since this deck doesn't really like summon a bunch of monsters out at once. But yes, very good card to have. Very pleased to have it in the deck. Next, to make use of all the non-effect and normal monster synergies, I am playing 3 copies of Fists of the Unrivaled Tenyi. This is a counter trap card that says if you control a non-effect monster, you can negate a spell or trap card activation or negate a monster effect activation. So almost a solemn for just controlling a normal monster, because all normal monsters are non-effect monsters. The only difference is it doesn't necessarily destroy the card, so if a monster activates its effect, you negate the effect, but you don't destroy it. So, but oftentimes, still good enough, always pretty live, and it has the bonus effect that if this set card is destroyed by your opponent's card effect, you can special summon a non-effect monster from your extra deck, which we will be making use of. Next up, 2 copies of Heavy Storm Duster. I don't like dealing with other back row decks. I play against a lot of people who have really powerful trap cards in their deck, field spells that get things moving. I want to be able to answer those, so I play 2 copies of Heavy Storm Duster to do so. It can destroy up to 2 spell or trap cards, which is nice. You can gain card advantage, and all you have to do is give up your battle phase, which you don't even care about if you do it on your opponent's turn. And then last, to continue the Negate Brigade, I am playing 2 copies of Solemn Judgment. Pay half your life points, negate a summon, a spell, or a trap card. Very good card in this deck where you can lock down your opponent quite easily and make it so that it's very hard for them to deal to play the game through what you have set up. Having a Solemn Judgment to answer the few answers they may have is pretty important. So we are playing 2 copies of Solemn Judgment. And that is it for our main deck lineup. Now, getting into our extra deck, like I said, we built this for Pot of the Extravagance, so all cards we are running are at a 3 of. We are playing 3 copies of Mirror Force Dragon. This is the fusion between Fang of Critius and Mirror Force. It can only be special summoned through the Fang of Critius, with Mirror Force being the other card you fuse with it, of course. And essentially, when a monster you control is targeted for an attack or by an opponent's card effect, except during the damage step, you can destroy all cards your opponent controls. So attacking a monster, targeting it, becomes a whole board wipe for your opponent. Quite a powerful effect when it goes off, and puts your opponent in a tough position because they have to answer this card, hopefully without triggering that, or they'll probably be at a loss. So definitely like Mirror Force Dragon. Definitely the one I like to summon the most. It's also just my personal favorite. Sick looking artwork. So we are playing 3 of that. Next up, we are playing 3 of the Destruction Dragon. This is the fusion between Ring of Destruction and Fang of Critias. It's got to be special summoned through that way, and then once per turn, you can target 1 card your opponent controls and destroy it. If the card you selected was a monster card, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. So let you pop, you could pop anything, but if you pop a monster, you're getting extra burn damage. Pretty important because this deck is a Phantasm Spirals are a deck where you poke a little life point damage at a time while your opponent can't play until they're out of the game. So getting that extra burn is quite nice, and you know, just being able to remove cards, we like that. It's very cool. And we are playing 3 of that. And then next up, I am playing 3 copies of the Tyrant Burst Dragon. This one is also really cool. Definitely gives Mirror Force Dragon a run for its money as being my favorite. This is the one that you special summon with Fang of Critias and Tyrant Wing. And when you do so, this card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. So this card can attack an entire board, which is pretty sweet. And also, you could target a face-up monster you control and equip this monster to that target. It gains 400 attack and defense, and then it can attack 3 times during the battle phase. So sometimes this card just gives you the ability to OTK. If you equip it to a monster, it has enough attack, it can attack 3 times. Pretty powerful. I have ended a number of games through doing that. So definitely a very powerful card. Worth considering, and I often decide a second Tyrant Wing just in case that card is really doing work for me. Next, I am playing 3 copies of the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. This is just the largest non-effect monster I could summon from the extra deck if my Fist of the Unrivaled Tenyi gets popped. So we want to make use of that 4,500 attack stat. Pretty big deal. It makes a pretty nasty body that can deal a lot of damage. Next up, I am playing 2 copies of Yugioh the Risen. I would probably play a 3rd copy if I had this, but essentially Yugioh the Risen is a non-effect water monster, 2,950 attack, making it pretty good card. Clearly not as good as Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon's attack stat, but the water attribute is very important because that means we can tag it out with Sea Stealth attack to protect it from being destroyed, and also we can tag it out when we want to use our Phantasm Spiral spell and trap cards. Because this is not a normal monster, so that means even though it's a non-effect monster, because it's not a normal monster, you cannot use the Phantasm Spiral traps. So we need to tag this thing out with Sea Stealth attack, and then we could do it again. So for that reason, it's definitely worth running. I would run a 3rd if I have it, but since I don't, I'm just playing 1 copy of Master of Oz to round it out. 4,200 attack monster. If I banished all the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragons, I would just play Master of Oz. If I wanted a huge attack stat, it's 300 less, and it's a sick koala with boxing gloves on. So who doesn't want? Who wants to scrap with that? Let's be real. Nobody does. And that is it for the extra deck. So that is it for the deck profile. Very fun deck for me to play. Lets me play Critius in a way with a deck that I am already quite familiar with playing, and a deck that also happened to beforehand be a very trap heavy deck. So it seems like a natural fit. Of course, there's some of the anti-synergies I mentioned between the Phantasm City and Fang of Critias, but it usually isn't that much of a hindrance because you just wait till a follow-up turn. I mean, if you're getting Pacifist the Phantasm City effect off, you're normally in a pretty good position. So your Fang of Critias can wait for a future turn to seal the deal. But definitely pretty fun, exciting always to summon out the big Critias fusion. They're fan favorites, and I'm a fan of them too. So thank you to Phantasm Spirals for giving me a way to play these cards without having to pick up a whole new strategy. So with that, that is the end of this deck profile. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you're a fan of Fang of Critias. Let me know what your favorite Critias fusion is. Is it the Doom Virus Dragon that I didn't include? We'll find out. Let me know down in the comments. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, everyone.